What is going on, guys? Welcome back to Tempus TV and welcome to my humble studio that also doubles as a balcony studio first. But today I've got nine tips for differences in Thailand culture that might be a lot different than where you're from, just so you can make sure that you're not upsetting anybody here, just to make sure you don't get kicked out of any places because you didn't know any better. But in general, these are just good things to know to make sure you're not being too abrasive in the country that you're visiting. All right, let's get into it. Alright, number one's pretty straightforward. As we've talked about in some of my previous videos, Thailand is a 90% Buddhist country, which means that people are pretty modest. So when you're planning on coming here, especially if you're planning on visiting any temples, if you're gonna have to go to any government buildings, anything like that, make sure you bring some clothes that are modest. Ladies, long dresses, no tube tops, things like that. Guys, it's really weird in Thailand for guys to walk around without a shirt on. I know you might be used to jogging at home and that's something you're doing. If you're up and down the beach, of course, no big deal, but any other time, it's generally a good idea to just cover up, and especially if you're going to temples and stuff like we said, anywhere that has to do with government or any of the religious stuff, it's a good idea to bring some clothes so you can dress modestly. All right, number two, kind of going hand in hand with that, PDA, if you don't know what that stands for, public displays of affection. This is something in Thailand that might seem kind of weird, especially if you know about like the red light districts and things like that. But generally PDA is frowned on. Of course, like holding hands, hugging, and things like that are okay in certain situations. We'll get into that in a little bit. But generally making out, grabbing on each other and stuff like that is generally frowned upon in Thailand, especially if you're in front of the older generation. So probably something to just consider. Just try to be respectful for those around you when you're here, obviously. All right, number three, and this one might seem kind of strange, but it is something that might catch you off guard. Thailand, people smile a lot more. And a lot of the times this is used as something to kind of diffuse a situation. If somebody doesn't understand, there's other reasons for this that kind of tie in. Another one that we'll cover here in a little bit. But people smile a lot more. Even if there's a disagreement, people will tend to smile a lot more to try to not make anybody uncomfortable. And I know in certain places, especially America, people can kind of take offense to this, which sounds crazy, but don't think that somebody is laughing at you or not taking you seriously because they're smiling. This is generally just used as a way to try to diffuse situations. All right, number four, and this is one that kind of ties into one we've already covered, the PDA thing, and that is hugging and handshakes. Of course, if you know somebody, if you're pretty close, it's not that weird, but generally, if you meet somebody for the first time, I know in America and a lot of Western countries, we like to shake hands. Here, that's not really a thing. Here, they do the Y. If you don't know what that is, there is a certain etiquette to it. Generally though, it's just used as a thank you or a nice to meet you, things like that. So a lot of Thais can get uncomfortable if you go in for a hug the first time you meet them. So just go ahead and throw the Y. Then once you get to know people a little bit better, they're a little bit more open to the like physical handshakes and hugging and things like that. Okay, number five, and this is one that I've seen people get quite frustrated with, myself included. In the States, we call it island time. Thailand is on island time. Nobody's really in a hurry. Certain things are scheduled really well, but other things kind of just go by the wayside, and it's kind of, oh, we'll get there when we get there type mentality. And I know, especially at a lot of places in the States and in Europe, things are very stringent. People have places to go, things to do, so they like things to be on schedule, everything to be quick. Thailand restaurants are notorious for food taking a bit longer, food coming out at different times. This is one of those things though that's just part of the culture here, so you're gonna have to get used to it, and it's not really worth making a fuss about. Obviously, if something is completely outlined, go ahead and pull somebody to the side, let them know, but just understand that everything just kind of is at a more leisurely pace here. Another really big one has to do with confrontation. So in most Asian countries, losing face is something that nobody wants to do, and I've had people get frustrated with Thais being like, oh, well, I told this taxi driver where I was going and asked him if he understood. He said yes, and then he took me into the wrong place. Or this person told me they didn't speak English, and then I heard them speaking English to another Thai or something like that. And generally, Thais don't want to be embarrassed. Thais don't want to necessarily admit that they don't know something, or they don't want to be opinionative. It's a lot easier for them to just say yes and try to figure it out as they go, as opposed to say, well, I don't know, because they feel like that's shameful for them. So this is something, try not to get too upset. There have been times where like I've talked to people or asked questions and they're like, oh yeah, and then it turns out to be wrong, and it was kind of confusing when I first got here. But generally it's just because, not that they're too prideful to admit that they don't know, it's just that they don't want to lose face and to be embarrassed that they don't know. Another huge one in Thailand that I see a lot of people doing, and luckily I looked this one up before I came myself, so I've been super aware of it, is another thing that has to do with touch and body things. So head and feet. In the Buddhist culture, your head is the closest to God, so that's the most sacred part of your body, and henceforth, your feet are the farthest away, and feet are considered very dirty here, and heads are considered very sacred. In the States, I know it's super customary to see like a cute kid or something to kind of just rub their heads. That's just a thing that's generally not a good idea here. It can be, some people don't care, obviously, if you're close with somebody, it's not that big a deal, but generally try to stay away from people's heads. Don't be pointing your feet, try not to kick your feet up on stuff when you're out and about. Try not to be pointing your soles at people when you are at the pool or whatever. And another big one is any Buddhist imagery, or the Buddhas, anything like that, any images of the royal family. Definitely make sure you're not obviously walking on them or anything like that, or make sure you don't have your feet kicked up and you got your dirty feet pointed at a picture of the king or something like that. This is one, especially with the older generation, that can be a serious issue and get you in a lot of heat. Kind of going hand in hand with the heads and feet thing, shoes. So obviously, if you're walking around all the time, your shoes are super dirty, and people think that feet are dirty in general. So shoes. You might already know that a lot of places will require you to take your shoes off, but I hear people always asking, well, how do I know which places are what? Easy way to do it is before you go in, just look outside. If there's a pile of shoes out front, it's pretty customary that you have to take your shoes off. 100% of the time, it's always polite to take your shoes off before you come into somebody's house, and that doesn't mean just kick them off and kick them in the corner. Take them off, place them by the door. Generally, you want them pointing back towards the door. And then other places like massage parlors, and there's a couple other random ones, but the best rule of thumb is if you see shoes out front, just go ahead and kick your shoes off. So probably the biggest one, the biggest surprise for me, this is something that I didn't hear anybody talk about before I came, and that's public restrooms, and even just the restroom in your house. So one main difference is that a lot of the times, especially if you're not in one of the big cities, if you're out and about in the more rural areas, squatty potties are a thing. And this is not the type of squatty potty you have at your house where it helps you put your feet up to get the natural angle. It's not really a toilet. It's essentially just a hole in the floor. You gotta essentially hover over it. There's no flushing or anything like that. There's a bucket that you dump down to flush it, and there's generally no toilet paper. So a lot of the times people use the water in one hand, splash with that hand, generally your left hand, which is another reason why Thais don't like to shake hands, I think. Splash in your left hand, clean up, and the bum gun. If you don't know what the bum gun is, that's probably a surprise that I'll leave for you when you actually get here, but it's a good thing, and I promise once you get used to it, you will never go back to toilet paper. I hope this video might have relieved some stress about going overseas. I know sometimes if you're going to countries that have a lot of differences when it comes to cultural norms, I know it can be a little intimidating at first, but generally Thais are very patient with foreigners, so there's nothing to worry about really. There are a few things that are just good to avoid off rip, a few of them mentioned in this video, touching heads, dirty feet, things like that. But in general, Thais are super patient, so I wouldn't worry about it. As always, guys, thank you so much for tuning in to Tempus TV. If you'd like to support the channel, the best way to do that is go downstairs, like the video, subscribe, share it with a friend. That way you continue to get updated every time I upload new stuff from Thailand. I upload every day, and I do live streams twice a week for any Q&As you might have. Mostly questions. I'll probably have some of the answers. But as always, I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon.